me back you up a little bit. You mentioned the national legislation, but a lot of what I know of the civil rights movement was the Rosa Parkses, and it was the other people, the individual stands that led essentially to conflict and then forced national initiatives.
Yes.
The National Guard coming into the schools, the legislation, and so on. So there's a role for leadership, but there's a role for individuals, isn't there?
Yes, right. I think you're exactly right. None of this would have happened had it not been for really the thousands, literally thousands of school children who left school, went out into the streets on a school day, basically cut classes, were truants, breaking the law, and they actually ended up being expelled at the time. But these were young people who were thinking about the future, thinking about their future and the future of their families, and they didn't want to live in the world that had been created for them.
So let's relate that to your current work with the Global and Community Leaders program.
Mm-hmm.
This is a different world than Birmingham in the 60s. And so what does Birmingham in the aughts have to offer its students, or what does it tell its students that are going out into a world that's vastly changing?
Well, part of what our program is about is to help young people discover their own power. First of all, to recognize that they can change things, and that they can maybe change them in ways more profound than they realize. But to do that, they first have to discover who they really are. They have to know pretty deeply what they believe in, what they care about. They have to know how they want to have an impact on the world. And then they need to take that passion and match it up with knowledge to be able to affect the change they want. They can't make a difference if they're just going to talk about it.
Yeah.
They've got to persuade others, and in order to persuade others that their vision of the world is one that's valid and should be followed, they need to provide reasons, they need to provide arguments, they need to give them information. And they need to imagine a different world. They need to be able to communicate about what that world would be like. And again, I think if you compare it to what happened with the students in Birmingham in the 1960s, the vision of the world they had was probably fairly vague. They just knew that the world as it was horribly oppressive, was demeaning, was a place where they were not allowed to bloom and blossom and show their full potential, and they just couldn't allow that to continue any longer. I think, there's probably not that same sense of urgency for these young people yet, but I do think they're beginning to recognize that if the world is going to change for their generation, they're the ones who are going to be the agents of that change.
You talked about, just a minute ago, we were talking about, you couldn't avoid it with Vietnam, with the struggles of civil rights,
That's right,
and all those things. You couldn't avoid that.
In the 60s, and it was all around me here, of course, with respect to civil rights. It was an unavoidable issue. I mean, as a white person, particularly growing up in the South, I had to confront it. I had to decide for myself, where did I stand on this question. The same thing was true for many men of my generation with respect to Vietnam, in terms of where did you stand with respect to the war, and how do you change that policy, which many of us came to believe was so wrong, and which we couldn't support. And so, I was part of this generation that was energized by these issues, that felt like we were trapped in a situation that we had to respond. And we were talking earlier about, I was thinking that something like that might happen in the wake of 9/11, and I guess I've been sort of dismayed to discover that most of what I see in the young people here is that they have, again, a kind of vague desire that the world is not the way it should be, and that we need to be different, the country needs to be different. But they're not sure how to make that happen. In the 60s, we thought automatically of petitioning the government or going to the government to redress our grievances if we were unhappy with things. And what's happened in the last 25, 30 years is that we have come to not trust government as the agent to make things better. We don't see government as a proactive tool to reshape the world. And so in many respects, we lack the sort of institutional levers to make things different. At least that's how I think a lot of young people see it. So they feel like it's all on them as an individual, that they can do something, you know, they can go volunteer for Habitat and help build a house, and collectively do something on a couple of days, and it will in fact have an impact and make a difference for the lives of the people who live in that house. And it can be multiplied over many sites and many days, but it's not the same thing as coming together as a community or coming together as a country and reaching some consensus about the direction we want to move in. The mechanisms for doing that, the means for doing that, have been truncated in our communities now. We don't have let me say the mechanisms have sort of been hijacked by other people who use them for their own particular interest groups, who use them for their own particular messages. Now, I think we're moving in the direction where there's a growing recognition that we need these kinds of institutions, we need these kinds of mechanisms, that it's not going to be created for us, that the only way we can have these now is to create them ourselves. And so instead of spending time building a Habitat house, which is not a bad thing to do, but instead of just doing that, spending that time actually constructing an organization or constructing a means of getting people together around a particular issue and trying to move forward that way, solve problems that way.
Speaking with Angela Fisher Hall at the Institute this morning, she had mentioned, I asked her a similar question, and she had said, well, one of the first steps you need is to know your own history and to kind of know what happened before in order to move forward. And I added know your own capacity too. So it's kind of for younger people who don't have an experience perhaps of government in a positive way, offering positive programs or their own petitioning of that government and seeing the positive change from that. I guess maybe that's part of the role of the university is to kind of awaken in them that, or expose them to that knowledge that in fact. Well,
you're getting into an area where, you know, I guess I get really preachy, which is that higher education has become more kind of an exalted training ground for particular professions, as opposed to a place where students can get a broad knowledge about a lot of issues in the world. And we've got to move more in that direction now. We need to see that the university is really the last opportunity that these young people will have before they get enmeshed in their lives, family lives, work lives. It's their last opportunity to really look at the world in a global sense, in both meanings of that word, to really get a sense of where they fit in that world.